First of all, I want to welcome all of you to our February 16th meeting of the Álamos History Association, and our welcoming words will come from our president, Pamela Price.
Okay, I've read that the Guarajillos used to live in the area where the town of Álamos lies now, but that they left as a mining community developed. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that's what I've read. Sometimes we can't always confirm these stories that we hear about our town. I'm looking forward today to learning more about this group of indigenous folk and the medical challenges that they face. So Barbara, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Angie, it's good to see all of you. I'm looking forward to being in Álamos in March, looking forward to it being warm. I don't know if you know, but last night and the night before, it snowed in Tucson. We had an accumulation of 1 inch. I can't believe it. And today, even though the skies are blue, there are still patches of snow around. Now, I live in Vail, so it's a little bit higher. But anyway, so I'm still in winter and I'm looking forward to joining you. And you know, when you first met me, or when I first met you, I told you about my experience of being with my husband, and he was helping to do one of the Desert Speaks issues. So we flew down in the late 80s and did that with Don Collier. And we've been coming down to Álamos ever since. But for the last 5 years, I've been there on a different kind of a mission, and a mission perhaps I haven't had a chance to share with all of you. And what I did was I came down as a Rotarian, and my goal was to write a global grant that was going to be funded by Rotary International and by 17 clubs across 3 different countries. And we created a global grant here with the spearheading influence of the Clínica Álamos and Dr. Elizabeth. And I know many of you know Dr. Elizabeth. And so we came down to address an issue that involves Álamos, but it also involves so many places in the world. In fact, I'm working on this very problem with a group in Zambia right now. The problem is that they have very remote groups of people living in villages that are far away from most of the resources that the country has, and therefore much of their healthcare is also a problem. And every country has tried to adopt ways to affect that. In fact, you are now probably familiar with our the year that every doctor has to dedicate to rural areas when they graduate from medical school. Dr. Betsy right now, and I call her Dr. Betsy, yeah, Dr. Elizabeth, Dr. Pettit, Dr. Petit, whatever, I'm talking about the same person. She now has 2, and they're called pasantes because they really are in passing, if you will. They come, they stay a year. And this was one of the ways that Mexico has tried to solve the problem of rural healthcare. But it really has not been a total success in terms of getting to those remote areas. So when I came down as a Rotarian, as a grant writer in 2017, I was about to embark on creating a healthcare requested by the people themselves, spearheaded by the trust and involvement of the Clínica Álamos. And that's what I'd like to share with you today. I'd like to share with you, now the grant is over. And so right now I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to tell you about what we did and about the model that we hope to share. Okay, and now let me get rid of this so I can see my screen. Okay, so as you can see, the 2 flags of Mexico and the United States are up above. In fact, there should be a Canadian there too, because Canada was involved in this project, and Rotary International is in the middle. And I wanted to tell you about the way our international global grant was developed and how it really did improve healthcare for the indigenous people in remote area of Sonora. Would all of you please put on your mute? It's just all of a sudden, it's just kind of difficult for me to listen. I think you're speaking. Anyway, we were there to provide help for today. That's very sure. And in fact, we really did. We were there during COVID, and that's going to be part of this story. But we were also there because we wanted to create a model for tomorrow. And it is in the creation of that alternative paradigm to providing healthcare in these rural areas, where I think Álamos has been really in the forefront of providing models and ideas for others. So right now, I'm going to talk to you about the successful completion of our Rotary International Global Grant. It started in 2019, and it ended in 2021. So here are the indigenous villages served by the global grant, and that's what GG stands for. We clustered the villagers of the Guarajillo Macudawe villages into 4 different groups. There are 7 villages overall that we dealt with. There were 1,600 people, and it covered an area of about 219 square miles. Down here, you'll see the blue arrow, and that is really our area of service. The wonderful town names, I know you know them, many of them, Borapaco, Mesa Colorada, Guacaray, Mochibampo, all of these just have wonderful small groupings of people that live in these villages, and they have been really part of this whole story because they have been part of the solution. Whenever I tell people about this work, I have to remind them about all the indigenous people that there are in Sonora. The Guarajillo Macudawe are down in yellow, number 7 at the bottom right. But there are many other people, the Seri, the Yaqui, the Mayo. We talk about them all the time. And one of the things I mentioned to them, and this is an old slide that I found, and you notice number 2 are called the Papagos. Well, the Papagos are what we now have in Arizona, and they're now called the Dawn Autumn. And just as the Guarajillo also bear the name that came kind of from the Spanish, they are now using their own name for themselves, the Macudawe. So I'll be referring to them as the Guarajillo Macudawe. I'm sure you know also that in Arizona, we have the Navajo. And that once again is a Spanish name, and they're calling themselves by their own name, Dene. And in any case, these are the people that we are going to serve. And our base of operation is going to be Álamos. And I don't have to tell you about Álamos and why it's the most amazing pueblo mágico I've ever experienced. Errol, I wish I had taken this picture. I think sometimes you might have. But this is really what Álamos is like at night. I've seen that moon, haven't you? Coming out and just shining right across the plaza next to the thing. And we set up our base of operation there because there are many services in your town of Álamos and in those nearby, like in Navajoa and also in Obregón, etc. But we also set up in Álamos because that is where the Clínica Integral Almas is located. This is a clinic that has worked with the indigenous people in the mountains with Dr. Elizabeth, Dr. Betsy, for the past, well, 6-7 years. They've gained her trust, she's gained theirs. They listen, they have two-way conversations where she can talk about medicine and they can talk about needs and they can talk about what they also do. It's a wonderful sharing. But once you get beyond Álamos, and I don't have to tell you this, there are many barriers. There are great distances from the clinics and the Mayos. The picture on the right is taken, by the way, on that bridge going over the Rio Mayo. And you'll notice that, for example, Mesa Colorada is 2.5 hours, the way I drive, to get there. But there are some way out there, like 14 hours. It's really a long way from the clinics, from hospitals, from help. And there isn't any public transportation. The roads are poor. On the left, you see Dr. Betsy's car, and I did take this picture, and we're driving on what actually looks like a pretty good road. But you know, in the rainy season, that isn't even called a road, it's called a river. I understand that the road is now being paved, or not paved, but graded, and there is better access at least to Borapaco. But beyond that, it still is very difficult. And in addition, the native language is not Spanish. It is Guarajillo Macudawe. So there's a language barrier. And there's a limited access to cell, electricity, and water. And all this really parlays into a lack of timely medical treatment and really poor stabilization for emergency transport to a hospital if they can get there. But one of the good news is that if you have a problem, if you have a need, and you pair it with an area that has resources and willing partners, you have amazing opportunities to make things happen. As I mentioned, within Álamos, we have the Clínica Almas, and I've inverted that name, but they are there, and they are there 24/7 for these people. And there are Social Security hospitals. If you can get the people out of the mountain down to the hospitals, they can have operations, treatment, really help for long and shorter stays. And in the communities themselves, there are people waiting to be the trainees that we were looking for, to be those healthcare promoters. And I'm going to call them the promotores, because that is what we call them. They're just waiting for us to train. And we're so lucky that we live in the technological advances of the 21st century. There's solar power, satellites, telemedicine, you name it. And this helps to make up for the lack of infrastructure in an area. And I would be really remiss if I didn't say that also one of the big sources of strength in Mexico is Rotary, as it is worldwide. We have Rotary in Navajo, Guaymas, Obregón. And just as you heard several weeks ago, Catherine talking about the Scottsdale Rotary helping so much with the Sister Cities program in March. This is also something that people should keep in mind. And it all began under a tree. And I don't know about you, but I have always wanted to be at one of these community meetings where they discuss their plans, their hopes, their dreams, their wishes for the future. And what you're looking at here is a circle. And right in the middle of it, and to see if I can touch her, this is Dr. Betsy, who is talking to the group of assembled people in Spanish. And way over here in the white hat, well, of course that happens. I'm sorry. Over here is Juan. I am going to get to that slide in a minute. Anyway, Juan is talking to the group in Guarajillo. So we have a conversation in both Spanish and Guarajillo about this particular situation, which is healthcare. Now, scattered around this whole group are Rotarians as well, because I brought down with me 23 Rotarians to do a needs analysis. I'm right in the back, see, with the blue shirt, and there are a bunch of Rotarians all around, and the women and children are sitting, the men are standing, and you know who's in the middle of that group, right? Right next to Betsy's feet, looking up at her, all the dogs. They want to know too. So anyway, this was our opportunity to begin talking about what the villages needed. And here's a group that just part of the group that I took down. I'm down at the bottom, right here, sitting underneath Dr. Betsy, and she is standing next to, on her right, your left, Cornelia. Cornelia is a healer from the village in Mesa Colorada. She's standing next to Juan, one of the elders, and it is they really who asked us to come down to partner with them. They know they have medicine. They do. The curanderas, the midwives, they have been providing healthcare for their people for a long time. But they also know that not everything can be cured by the amazing botanicals that they have in their gardens. They want also access to Western healthcare. And that's what we're trying to do, is create a situation where we can bring together Western healthcare and the traditional healthcare and make something that actually works for everyone. So we had this friendship exchange in 2018. And at the end of the exchange, we came away with 4 objectives and a global grant that we wrote. First of all, we wanted to train 4 village promotores and 12 vinculadores. Well, the promotores are adults who are going to be trained like EMS people with all of the equipment and these knowledge that one would have to be able to be the person who took vitals, the person who talked with the doctors were the eyes and ears of doctors, really. And the 12 vinculadores, this is an idea and something that doesn't exist in many other places, but Dr. Betsy wanted it to happen. Those are 12 high school students that came along for the ride. They were part of the training. They were part of receiving equipment, and they were people who the villages recommended because they were interested in science, they were in high school. They themselves, for example, could accompany an elder to the hospital, speak to both the doctor in Spanish and the elder, perhaps a woman in Guarajillo. They were able to help follow through when the person came home and was recuperating. The second thing we wanted to do was to provide basic healthcare equipment that stayed in the villages, that stayed with the promotores, that stayed with the Clínica Álamos. And of course, we also wanted to provide community training so that everyone could understand and access healthcare. And not surprisingly, we needed to provide telemedicine. And the telemedicine system that we selected was based on solar powered and satellite. So in July of 18, our Rotary grant was awarded. Wonderful. And 7 months later in February, takes time in Mexico to get things going, we celebrated with the global grant inauguration. And we had celebrated just the way people in Mexico do. I hope maybe some of you came to that inauguration. We celebrated with music, mariachis, theater, and look at these wonderful, great big puppets that they made. This is Dr. Bernal, this is Dr. Gladkey, Jean Gladkey's husband, and this is me. How about that? And after the whole festivities ended and the global grant commitments were made and we had a wonderful dinner, the man who was carrying this 10-foot puppet came up to me and said, "And good news, I want you to know that this is yours." Now I'm standing next to my husband and he is trying to imagine how we're going to get this 10-foot puppet in our car to take back to Tucson. Fortunately, I found a home for her to live in Álamos for the rest of the time. And I hope she's still there enjoying. And then the work began. Intensive training for our promotores. The promotores were selected, by the way, by the villagers based on the people that they trusted, the people they felt had the capacity, and the people who were interested. So on the left, we have things like first aid training that were being prepared, CPR, all of them were trained to take vitals and use the instrumentation that we provided them to do that. And to teach this group predominantly of young women, although there were several men as well, about the human body, about the problems that could assault it, and about how to prevent those problems, probably the most important thing we did. And in addition, we provided equipment that stayed with them. On the left, you see a starter nurse kit. Each and every one of our 16 trainees received this suitcase. It was filled with blood pressure cuffs, stethoscopes, thermometers, scissors, you name it. And each one of them had this and was trained to use this and to take the vital information from it that it could provide. In addition, we provided to the promotores, the 4 different adults, this happens, equipment that was going to stay in the village. This happens to be a portable sonogram. One of the things that I experimented when I first went down to Álamos was a young woman who had come in from Guajaray, traveled all the way on that bumpy road. She was 8.5 months pregnant. She came down to Álamos because she wanted to make sure that her baby was in the right position. Now, I have to tell you that this was also one of the very first times she'd ever sought medical care. This is also something we wanted to change. We wanted prenatal health care to start right away. And so now in each village, if a woman is pregnant, they can have the sonogram done right there. They don't need to make that jaunting trip down. And on your right is Dr. Gladkey. He lives in Álamos. I hope you have met him and his wife, Jean. She's part of the Comadres. He's an audiologist. He was one of my professors at the University of Arizona. And one of the reasons that I came down in this particular mission, because I was in the Department of Speech, Language, and Hearing Sciences, the people who trained speech pathologists and audiologists. He is holding one of the new generations of audiometers. hearing health is an issue in every culture. And I think for those of you who have ever had your hearing tested, you probably remember going into that soundproof room where there's no echoes and there's perfect conductivity of sound, and you've gotten an audiogram. Well, this is not something that you can do easily in any of the villages. So what they have developed is this audiometer that you're looking at. The little white pieces that are headphones are actually the soundproof rooms. They go over your head and over your ears. And in the middle of this are little cannulas that go in your ear. And through this system, you can actually, along with the audiogram, the audiometer behind him, you can actually get as reliable as audiogram as you could in a soundproof booth at the University of Arizona. So things like this are just making amazing differences. And in addition, of course, we had to provide the telemedicine equipment. Now, if you were expecting some great big machinery like what you might have seen in hospitals, I'm sorry, I'm going to disappoint you, because this is it. On the left, you see solar panels that I personally took down in my car. They are strategically located in each of the villages to capture the energy that the sun can provide. And then with that energy, literally a normal car battery uses to charge that. And that charge that goes into the battery is enough then to power breathing machines and other things such as our solar modem and our cell phones. So this combination of solar panels, battery, and especially our smartphones, whoops, are the essence of this telemedicine system. And to tell you the truth, we no longer rely on the solar or the satellite modem anymore, because there has been an increase in connectivity, and with our phones and WhatsApp, which is free, it literally is the basis of our telemedicine right now. So after a year of training, I came back across the border to Arizona. I had not heard of COVID before that. I had not. It wasn't something we talked about in Álamos. It wasn't something that I heard about online. And by golly, it was here though. And it was a reality. So when I came across the border in February, the doctors turned right around and went back out to the villages. They went out there because these are indigenous people who have had less exposure to the diseases of Western cultures and could easily have been highly impacted. So they went back out, and there's Dr. Betsy on the left, to show them about distancing, how to keep their villages safe. In some cases, they closed down the villages. They also brought with them PPE, the famous gloves and masks and gowns and that. And I tell you what, it was an amazing opportunity to get back in there before COVID really, really hit those villages. And we were a year post-training. We were into the second year, and I want to tell you that the training and the equipment we provided paid off. During that entire time, all the way through 21, there was not a single villager who got sick from COVID. Nobody died. And the training was effective. The equipment did work. And when I started this grant, I can remember some people in Evanston, which is where Rotary International is located, saying to me as they reviewed the grant, "But Barbara, what do you think? These are people with very low levels of literacy rates. Are they going to be able to do the technological piece of what you're proposing?" But I want to tell you, these people may not have strong cell phone connectivity at times, but they do cell phones. They know more about Bluetooth than I do, that's for sure. They were able to turn their phones into amazing parts of that telemedicine. And the training that we provided, not only did they learn it, but they used it, and it really paid off. So in December of 2020, it really was time to celebrate this global grant success. 2 years passed. And I want to tell you that we decided to celebrate, to bring some closure to this grant cycle by using what Dr. Betsy had developed as an annual puppet festival. Now, what you're looking at here on the left is a puppeteer, but she did a lot more, and so did everybody else, than just work puppets. In fact, if you look carefully, can you see the clothesline that she's got going all the way through this group of children, going all the way through the village? They are following her, masks and all, like the Pied Piper of Hamelin, with music. They're really, really buying into all of the things that were going on. And look at their faces. Can you see the joy of just getting together? Can you almost hear the music? And they're getting ready to party. And that's exactly what we wanted to do. We held this puppet festival in each of the 7 villages. We might have been tempted to do it all together in 2 or 3, but because of COVID, we wanted to keep people as separate as possible. So they're getting their masks, they're getting their hands clean, they're doing this distance thing, the whole drill, just like you and I. But you know, one thing in English, we call that distance thing social distancing. Well, I tell you what, I think the Spanish term is better. It's called sana distancia, healthy distance. That is, I think, perhaps a better way to capture what this is all about. So as I said, we took advantage of the annual puppet festival. Here is one of the puppets. Look at this. Here he is, just beautiful. And by the way, this black figure behind him is his handler. And that hand of the handler is the hand of the puppet, with a little bit of burlap and a little bit of, well, it was just a beautiful scene to have a puppet festival. Puppets are a perfect way for community learning and community sharing. It's a visual art, very interactive. Think of Punch and Judy. The audience and the actors are both in it together. It's also very memorable and non-threatening. You can talk about things like alcoholism, domestic violence, suicide with puppets that you cannot really do easily in many cultures face to face. It's a fun way to teach, and it's a fun way to learn. And they had great big puppets too. Look at this great gal over here, and her handler, I guess you'd call her. Look at how her hand was being moved by this little piece of wire, and another one. Well, all of this just was something that the villagers could relate to, they loved. So this year's show was special. We weren't just talking about ways to keep ourselves healthy. This time we were going to try to bring a closure to this grant. So the puppeteers were tasked with creating a script that portrayed how much the promotores had done to keep the village safe and well. But the key ingredient was it had to be fun. And so the title of the show was Los Tres Bichos. Now I have to explain to other people what bicho is. You probably know, something creepy crawly that you don't want around. But that bicho stands in for the word microbios, microbes, germs. So on your screen, you see 3 of those germs. In fact, their characters included 3 germs who were these microbios. They had wonderful names that had to do with the various illnesses they could probably promote. The victims were the promotores, and of course, the heroes were going to be the villagers and the children. So what was the plot? Well, the germs just can't make the villagers sick anymore because the promotores are teaching them how to protect themselves. Can you imagine washing your hands all the time and using cloro to kill them? Oh my goodness. So the germs planned to attack the promotores when they were not looking. But of course, the villagers and the children rescue the promotores and foil the germs again and again and again. And everybody enjoyed. Masks and all, adults and children. It was just fun. And after the puppet show, the puppeteers carried it forward. On your left, you see the puppeteer leading the children in a game that has to do with sana distancia, this 6-foot interval you try to create between yourself. And on the right, you see the puppeteer running into kind of actively advocating for his own health, taking charge. In the background, of course, you see all of the parents sitting around watching, and you're not going to be surprised that there was also wonderful, this always happens to me, food, because making learning and this type of thing fun is very important. And I want to read to you now a text that I translated from the Spanish that was written to Dr. Elizabeth. And it reflects, I think, the impact that it had upon the villagers, but also upon others who are working in it. And with this, I have to say it. This is the way I felt. Dear Dr. Elizabeth, I just wanted to share with you that we are very happy with the work we are doing in the Sierras. Coming to Álamos and having such a personal contact with the children and their families has grounded us a lot. And we would love to continue supporting this work. Seeing each of the different communities this time has given us all a lot of context for your vision and effort. It has truly generated something very beautiful in our very being. In truth, I am very grateful to you for trusting me and my team to do the Community Puppet Festival. You have changed our lives, and we have learned so very much. We are happy to be here. And Obed ends his email, or actually a text. Thank you, my good friend, and please forgive me for telling you this in the middle of the night. But I have cried, laughed, and reflected on this whole experience, and was burning to tell you how much we also want to contribute something to this crazy world. Thank you for everything you do to make a difference. With admiration, Obed. Wouldn't you like to get a letter like that? A letter that reflects so many of the good things that came out of something that was really difficult. And right now, I just want to share with you a very brief pre-COVID video from 2018, just to share the village with you. I love that music, and I love those pictures. It's before the pandemic. It's when people could gather. And I especially appreciate the pictures of the trucks and the people coming across the river. That's the way many of those villages are connected. And it shows just how important this was for them, how much they wanted to come. And so now in 2023, the global grant has ended, but the effort still continues. 16 of the Guarajillo healthcare promoters have been trained. They live in the village. Medical equipment has been provided, and it stayed in the village, and the telemedicine system is up and running. And we have a University of Arizona grant that's helping to move this effort forward. But sustaining the effort, the hope, and the challenges are still things that I worry about at night. We do have the University of Arizona grant clinical practicums. As you know, to become a doctor, a nurse, or physical therapist, whatever, you need to spend time with in clinic and with patients. And so what we have done is taken the telemedicine system that we put in the mountains and the promotores as part of a clinical practicum experience where students at the University of Arizona, who don't have to go down at that moment to Mexico, can actually sit in and talk through cases, talk with the promotores, and share in this global health experience. We've trained 74 people in the last 2 years. They're from the College of Nursing, the College of Medicine, Public Health, Pharmacy. We've also seen increased awareness by the Mexican government. They now have opened, I think, the clinic more continuously in Mesa Colorada or in Burapaco. I can't remember where it is, but they still don't go out to the far-flung areas. And in many cases, they still wait for patients to come to them, as opposed to some of the training that we did with the promotores, which is getting them to get to their neighbors' houses, check in on them. How are they doing? What do they need? And there also is a need to sustain the funding, which I have been working on, but haven't had a lot of success north of the border. And these are sustaining funding for the promotores and the communication system, those phones. The promotores, a couple of years ago, the economy was so difficult that many of them were tempted to go and harvest tomatoes to get cash into their communities. The crops are failing because of climate change. It has been several years now since they've had good crops. And this is a continuous ongoing problem. And the political instability is also a problem. This is one of the reasons that we've had to keep the clinical practical experience up in the States and not bring them down. But this is something that can be worked on. This is something that will change. And so we kept our promises to keep them healthy. We've hopefully provided a model for many others to learn from. And for me, the hope continues. On the left, you see the courtyard of the clinic. Steve, this is right next door to where you live. Dr. Betsy's in the middle, and the promotores are all around. And on the right is a little guy. He lives in Guajaray. And every time I would go to Guajaray, he would come up to me and he'd say, "Hi, señora, por favor, foto." And we would sit down and I'd take his picture and we would look at it. Well, his smile just says everything to me. He is the hope of the future. And I'm hopeful that we can keep these people well. And I want to just mention that we are also doing something that you may not know about. And that is that Dr. Betsy has been working with a team from MIT on a drone. And actually, you may have seen this drone flying around Álamos the past couple of weeks. They have actually built this drone out of a 3D printing machine. It only costs about $100 to make this drone. And the reason the drone is necessary with far-flung communities is that even when you're talking about normal kinds of medication, let's say insulin, you've got to keep this at a certain temperature for a certain period of time. You cannot let it get hot or worn. And so the drone is able to fly in, drop its payload somewhere. Obviously, this takes somebody who knows how to work a drone, and that's what we're working on, and then bring the drone back so we can do another payload. So this is something for the future. It isn't something that's going on right now, but it is certainly something in the pilot stage. So with that, I just want to thank all of you for listening, finding out about something that's going on in your very backyard that I think is part of making history for the future. I am, as I said, working with people from Zambia on creating a model like this that isn't doctor focused, but it's really focusing on training and then connecting them with the doctors in the cities and providing help in terms of medicine and equipment. So with that, I am going to stop sharing and let's see if I can do this. And I'll be really glad to answer, answer any questions you may have. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Wonderful.
Well, I don't know if that was what you normally were expecting to hear at the History Association, but give it a few years and it'll be history. So
we hear about all kinds of things at the History Association.
It's true. That's true.
That's right.
Did you have any questions?
Well, I wonder about the language. You mentioned that many of the communities don't speak Spanish, or at least that's not their primary language. Is communication hard?
I have to clarify that, because I have to say it isn't a community that doesn't have that has a different language. It's really the parts of the community. The men in general have been out working as vaqueros or working somehow in contact with Spanish. And I want to say that I have yet to meet a man who doesn't speak Spanish, but it's the women of the village who do not. And so unfortunately, the women of the village are also the caretakers. They're the healthcare providers. They're the educators. They are people that we want to understand. And by the way, they happen to get sick too. And being transported to to a Social Security hospital to have your gallbladder taken out or whatever, and you can't talk to them, you can't tell them how you're feeling, what you're doing. There are so many reasons why it is still a very, very important issue. Now, the young people in the community, they seem to be bilingual. That's why, and the men too, by the way. The men are bilingual, but they can speak Spanish. It's the women that I worry about, and I think it's probably going to be another generation or so before that is not the case. Right now, they're young women. They're 30s. They're going to learn to be 70, you know, I hope. So that's the language issue. And also, by the way, Dr. Elizabeth is trying to do what I think all of Mexico is trying to do, and that is preserve their native language. And so a lot of the materials that she's producing, both as videos, she just did a video for the United Nations that had to do with the human rights for healthcare. And they did it in Guajillo with subtitles in different languages. And she did this with a videographer from Obregón. And she submitted it, so we'll see if we win it, right? But so yes, they're trying to preserve the language, but they want it not to be a barrier. So they're doing, even the healthcare material is done in both languages.
Did the other projects on this global grant in Sonora, were they similar to the one that you've been closely connected with in Álamos? Do you know anything about these other places where they were trying to reach remote communities?
You know, at the time that I wrote this grant, it was the only global grant going on in Sonora through Rotary, right? Now, there are a lot of other grants out there from USAID, from the health department, you name it. There are a lot of grants, for example, from the University of Arizona up on the border. They would do a lot of borderland work. And they also use the concept of the promotor, but the concept of the promotor that we developed here, we brought down some people before COVID and before there was this political instability, and we brought down some directors of healthcare promoters in the States. And to tell you the truth, they said, I can't believe it. You guys are teaching them to treat people, to actually provide medical assistance. In the States, the promotor, the healthcare promoters, tell people about blood pressure screenings. They help to find out who needs what and then get them the resources. So it's kind of a liaison position. In our case, we're training people to be doctors. Now, I have done one other global grant in Mexico, and it was in Jalisco, and it was in conflict resolution. So we were working in the schools, helping children learn to talk it out and not use violence, etc. So I'm sorry, Pam. I wish I could tell you that there was lots of stuff going on. I actually have an opportunity to find that out because I'm on a Zoom this next week with other healthcare promoters throughout the area of Mexico and Arizona. It's like a binational thing. Let me ask that question. But to my knowledge, it's hard to work in Mexico. I have to tell you, it is hard. When we first were funded, this was when AMLO took charge. And one of the things that AMLO did when he first took charge was he closed all the bank accounts for anybody that was a nonprofit. Well, that included our Rotary partner. So that we could no longer get the money here. So what we arranged to do was to send the money to the States and then give the money to Mexico as it was requested, rather than having it live here. And actually, given the exchange rate and the various things that happened to it, that was probably a good thing. But at the time, it's all those rules and regs. Mexico does not make it easy for you to work here. And by the way, one of the reasons that we're working here is that we are not doing this. We are supporting the people locally who are doing this. So Rotary got the money. I got involved because of my language and my healthcare, but it's the people on the ground, the villagers, Dr. Betsy, who's making this happen.
I didn't realize that AMLO had forced nonprofits in the manner which you mentioned. What do you remember? What the justification were? These nonprofits?
It was money laundering.
countries?
You know, they had been under such scrutiny that they were, in fact, Joan and I have encountered this even in the States, not that we couldn't get things open, but it was hard because they're so worried about money laundering, even in the States. But in AMLO's term, when he came to term, they were under great scrutiny because of the international uproar about all of the corruption that was taking place. So he did not want that to happen. So he closed all nonprofits. Now they opened it up again. They had to all open new accounts, all of it. So everybody, including our Rotary Club in Navajo, which is made up of 22 of the nicest men you ever want to meet. Now, my club is men and women, but not in Mexico. I tell you, I asked Vicente once, I said, do you have women in your club? And he said, well, we tried it once, but our wives didn't like it. So that went the women. So anyway, I think you can understand, but he's, if you ever want to get in touch with a Rotary Club, Vicente Mendes is his name. And he's beautifully bilingual and looking, and every Rotary Club everywhere is looking for projects to help. And, you know, it's easy in your backyard up here. If you're in Green Valley, you don't have to look far for a project, you know, but if you want an international project, you need to have boots on the ground. You just don't land someplace and say, hey guys, I'd like to do something internationally. You know, you are the eyes and ears for Rotarians in the States and even in Oslo, I bet they have Rotarians. I'm sure they do. So anyway, idea.
Well, Barbara, that's how I met you, was through this grant. And, you know, and I followed it. Now, I wasn't there at the celebration to begin it, but Carolyn was, and she told
Oh,
me how
good.
wonderful that was. I can't remember why I was unable to be there, but I remember from the beginning on the funding, and I'm just so happy that this has been able to carry through. I guess the question on the funding, how do people give to keep this this program alive? What?
You know, that's an interesting question. The clinic has formed a nonprofit within Álamos, and they're looking for the 501c3 in the States as well. And so that really and truly, this is not a Rotary project. So this is really on the ground right now, the people who are utilizing these funds that we are searching for them too, is the clinic. I can find that kind of information out. If any of you are interested in knowing more or simply knowing about what the clinic does or interested in visiting one of the projects, please let me know, or let Dr. Elizabeth. She says, don't call me Betsy. I said, why? She says, because in Spanish, it looks like you're calling me Dr. Pepsi. And so she doesn't want that. But I met her as Betsy. And you know, have you ever tried to change names in the middle of a stream? It's hard. You know, you're what I first knew you to be. and
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah,
Barbara.
but this is an issue. Yeah.
Barbara,
I was going to say,
oh,
I was going to say, if you haven't visited Clinic Alma, you should. They do very good work, and I'm pretty sure that, and you know, they just asked for a donation, and part of that donation does go to this work, doesn't it, Barb?
Absolutely, it does. Many people also go when they want to speak with an English-speaking doctor, for example, and they're able to go and talk with somebody about whatever, or get a medication refilled or whatever. But yes, they do ask for a donation. It doesn't have a price, but we give what we can. And sometimes what we learn about is a project that we're interested in, like the drone, or something that we particularly want to get behind, kind of like our own projects in AHA, you know. So I suggest you go and introduce yourself to Dr. Elizabeth. She will be there in the month of March. She travels a fair amount, but where she travels is literally to places where she's working on things like the MIT drone, or working with another university trying to get another clinical practicum up. So she's not always there. And I think the heat of the summer is a time when she's not particularly there. In fact, a lot of us aren't there during the heat of the summer. The last time I went, I was there when the dengue mosquitoes were there, and I had to bring 2 beds that I bought on Amazon that were like, you crawl into them, they're mosquito netting. They were wonderful, actually. They were 6 feet long and about 4 feet wide, but zipping yourself in and out and remembering in the middle of the night when you have to get up that you're zipped in and not falling out of the bed with this thing is something. Yes, hi, how are you? Hi. You're
Hi.
not Susan. I forget. What is your first name? You tell me.
Mike,
Mike, I know, yes. Yes, but you
Um,
say Susan, so I'm processing Susan and I mean.
Barbara, I think you know that I'm working on literacy issues, primarily the digital connectivity. I'm wondering, to what extent do you collaborate or do you work with the telesecundarias and the communication channels that they work with?
You know, this is something that has to do now with what the clinic is moving forward. I went down literally with a very specific funded grant that was a training grant to train the promotoras, both in Álamos and in their native village, to provide the equipment. So I am not actually aware of a lot of things that go on outside of what I did. And so I think that's a wonderful question to if you got a chance. Well, I'm going to be there in March, and I will be working pretty consistently with Betsy while I'm there, helping to do the funding or whatever I can help with. You know, they work on a shoestring. They don't have a lot of money. And so maybe that's one of those times you could stop by and we could talk to her about that. And she will know much more than I do.
Yeah, the reason I bring it up is I am working with the superintendent of the telesecundarias to create a model in La Aduana because they have some connectivity. And we want to work with the secondary students to become instructors for their families, and potentially also to help with some of the promotora training. And we're just wondering whether we would first have to look for funds to put a program like that together, or whether that could be something that the U of A could be interested in. What do you think could be the method?
Well, I can tell you one thing, that this is literally the challenge, is to the numbers of programs, the opportunities to train, the wonderful promise of training young people is very, very strong. But funding those programs has not been easy. And I cannot say that you could look to the clinic for funding. We have had to look outside of the clinic for funding. And sometimes it's kind of like the Mexican government says, but we do this. We provide healthcare. It's free for everybody. Look, well, yeah. Not really. Not really to the level of certainly the people that live far from those services. If you happen to live on top of a Social Security hospital, great. You can get that gallbladder out. So funding is an issue, and the clinic is not a funder. The clinic is one of the programs that looks for funding. I don't know if any of you are familiar with, I'm thinking of his last name, Paul. He did Partners in Health. He's worked in Haiti and worked in a lot of different, Paul Farmer. He's very famous, actually, and they have got quite a bit of funding program. Kind of Google Partners in Health with Paul Farmer. See what they've done. It's huge. I mean, it's nothing like what we do. I would love to have Partners in Health adopt us, but it hasn't. So, and by the way, I don't mean us. I'm an outside observer and helper when I can, but in no way affiliated with the clinic, but certainly would love to put people in touch with a really interesting opportunity. Look forward to seeing you all in March somehow. Pam, I have a question for you. I've been approached by a variety of people having to do with that video project. Remember, with the flood of Norbert and everything. And I wondered, will you be in Álamos during March? Could I meet with you and talk with you and anybody else could we have a meeting about that? I'll be there, and I would love to get together with the people while I'm there. I've had some people offer ideas that the Álamos History Association might be interested in supporting, especially along the lines of interns. So I
Yeah,
just,
Ellen
that's what I meant.
Ellen Ryan suggested that in our meeting, that we
Yes.
do a special program on Norbert next season.
That's
Yeah.
I
right.
think it's a
So-
great idea.
Barbara, just one more thing. Would you be able to introduce me to that person in Rotary, just to inform Rotary of what we're doing with the telesecundarias, so they would know that there is another active program that we're trying to get the attention of. We
Mhm.
just presented our program to the director of the Instituto Sonorense de la Cultura, trying to see whether we could engage them as part of this literacy issue. And we think,
You know, I'd be glad to. And I think that not only the Rotary Club in Navajo, but also in Obregon. You're
okay,
actually closer to Obregon in many ways. Those two are your principal Rotary contacts. So, well, thank you all very much. I see,
you,
I'm
Barb.
not sure
I
what
have
time
a
it is.
question. I have a
Yeah.
question still.
Sure.
When you talk about political instability, am I correct in assuming that you're referring to the activities of the cartels in that area?
I think that is the concern. It's not just here in Álamos, but it's everywhere. We were going to bring down the nurse practitioners, I want to say in November, and we were told by the people in Guaymas that it was too dangerous to do that. So it's carteles, yes, it's sicarios, all of that. There's a lot of still instability. I myself have been out to the mountains many, many times and never felt afraid, but I know now, I just think there's an increased awareness of this issue and some concern. Yes,
Well,
you're welcome.
Barbara, thank you for this wonderful presentation. And I hope to continue these discussions with you and see in what way Carol and I can help anyway in the future. But thank you for your involvement.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
For all
this
that
has
you've
been,
done.
yeah.
Very interesting, very wonderful
Yeah,
presentation.
yeah.
I'm,
And
thank you.
I guess it's exactly an hour, so I guess we'll close. And I'll get this video up as soon as I can. And I miss Álamos. We've been away a week and a half, and I can't wait to get back. So anyway.
Errol, could I make one last comment? I have to
Sure.
tell you, this is funny. Last night we were on a Zoom and my husband and I afterwards started playing around with screen effects. I don't know why we did this, but we found something called screen effects. Well, there was a thing down there that put on mustaches, beards, and eyebrows. Well, I just thought we were playing. Well, we were. This morning when I came online to connect with you guys, I had a mustache. Oh, I was so, and I'm like, where was that button? Where was that button? And it's in the very lower right-hand corner, and it's something called video effects. Effects is the word. Well, anyway.
I have
Be
seen
careful.
that in use. Okay, well, I've seen that in use, and I'm glad you got it straightened out anyway.
Oh, it's awful. Okay. See you
Okay.
all. Thank you.
Okay, we'll see you soon.
Okay, video posted later today or early tomorrow.
Great.
Okay,
Okay.
we'll close the meeting, and thank you all for being a part. Let me hit this.